When we think of the absolute baseline for historical evil, we almost always pictured this face. Global culture has framed the catastrophes of World War II as if he were the undisputed architect of all human destruction in the 20th century. However, the raw data tells a more complex story. In China, Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward led to a man-made famine so severe that people reportedly ate tree bark and soil to survive. A death toll is estimated between 30 and 40 million people in just 2 years. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin oversaw the Great Purge, executing his own officers and teachers, while millions more died in the forced labor camps of the Gulag or the engineered famine of the Holodomor. His regime is responsible for over 20 million deaths. Japan's Hideki Tojo presided over Unit 731, a facility where civilians were dissected without anesthesia and used as test subjects for biological weapons, contributing to millions of deaths across Asia. When these figures are plotted on a graph, a clear statistical disconnect emerges. The leaders responsible for the highest raw numbers of deaths do not occupy the same space in our collective cultural memory. Look at where Hitler's bar enters the chart. Despite these comparative statistics, Stalin was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize twice, and the United States secretly recruited the scientists from Unit 731 for their own research. This suggests that history, as it is taught, prioritizes specific types of villainy. By centering the century's carnage on a single defeated figure, the narrative moves away from the systemic failures of multiple nations and toward the pathology of one man. The mainstream narrative often treats this rise to power as a historical anomaly, but the ideologies used to fuel it were centuries old. This map tracks the historical timeline of Jewish expulsions across the Roman Empire, England, France, and Spain. This systemic exclusion was a long-standing European tradition, driven by religious and social conflicts long before the 1930s. These pre-existing prejudices were amplified by global figures outside of Germany. American industrialist Henry Ford used his own newspaper to publish a weekly series titled The International Jew, The World's Problem, helping to normalize these ideas on a global scale. The geopolitical conditions were set here at the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. The victorious Allies imposed severe restrictions, seizing German industry and gold reserves while redrawing national borders by force. The result was a total economic collapse. These children are playing with stacks of currency that had become worthless due to hyperinflation, a crisis that destroyed the savings of the middle class and left the population searching for any leader who promised a way out. During this period, major corporations saw an opportunity for profit. IBM developed the punch card systems used to identify and track individuals for the state, while the foundations for Volkswagen and Porsche were built directly into the new regime's infrastructure. A desperate economy and a tradition of prejudice provided the fuel. Corporate interests provided the engine. The dictator was simply the one who stepped in to drive it. There was also a structural shift in how the state managed its money. In 1933, the government bypassed international private central banks to establish its own financial system. They issued MIFO bills, a form of sovereign currency that allowed the country to rebuild its infrastructure and skyrocket its GDP, without taking on international debt or paying interest to private lenders. This specific action, removing a nation's economy from the control of private central banking, is a shared trait among several leaders who met violent ends. Abraham Lincoln issued government-backed greenbacks to fund the Civil War without relying on private banks. He was assassinated shortly after the war ended. John F. Kennedy signed executive orders that challenged the established authority of private financial institutions. His term ended in Dallas. Muammar Gaddafi attempted to unify African trade under a single gold-backed currency to bypass the Western financial system. His regime was dismantled shortly after. To the global financial order, the threat was not just military expansion, but the demonstration that a major industrial power could grow completely independent of international debt. The context of this system does not excuse the gas chambers or the industrial-scale slaughter of the Holocaust. Those crimes are fixed points in history. But as this photograph shows, he was operating on a stage filled with other leaders. They negotiated with him, signed agreements with him, and initially viewed his rise as a useful check on other powers. This level of militarization required years of global compliance. The war machine grew because it was profitable for a system that prioritized its own expansion over human cost. Once the war ended, the victorious empires, nations with their own histories of colonization, forced famines, and purges, needed a way to redefine their image. They did this by editing the narrative, concentrating the world's collective guilt onto the single figure they had defeated. History is written by the victors to serve the victors. By constructing a singular scapegoat, the institutions and empires that survived could wash their hands of their own complicity, making their own crimes disappear behind the shadow of a manufactured villain.